Duke Watson has committed to the Louisville Cardinals. We'll talk about what the 2024 prospect brings to the program and what this means for the running back position moving forward. With that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. As always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. 2024 running back prospect Duke Watson visited the Louisville Cardinals this past weekend and has since committed to Jeff Brohm's program. We'll talk about what he brings to the table, what this means for the running back room moving forward, and also we will dive into a Monday mailbag segment. Before we do that, it is the off season. Very interesting, as you can tell. There has been a new change to the setup for the YouTube page, which I thought was pretty interesting. Shout out to the Locked On graphics team for getting this cooked up. Also, there will be another graphic added here in the next couple of episodes that includes my Twitter handle. So if you do forget that, it's at @dpence_. So bear with me here. But the podcast may be in off-season form, but the Louisville football program, it seems like Jeff Brohm is never in off-season form, despite still being about 80-plus days away from game day officially in the 2023 cycle. But 2024 prospect Duke Watson has committed to the Cardinals program. Very interesting commitment. We talked about Louisville adding multiple running backs to the conversation in the 2024 class when you consider the players that could be leaving, so on and so forth, right? But I think that this just confirms the notion that, there's this style of thinking. There's this narrative out there about Jeff Brohm that he doesn't like to run the football. And although I disagree, I think that there's a little bit of merit to the suggestion that it's a very pass-dominant offense. But when you watch his offense play, and even though, Scott Satterfield's offense at Louisville has ran the ball more, or I should say past tense, ran the ball more than what we're going to see from Jeff Brohm's team. What you have to understand about Jeff Brohm and Brian Brohm's offense is that a lot of times the running backs are receivers out of the backfield, involved in short screens, slants right out of the backfield. So it's almost like an extension of the run game, right? So as much as it isn't a traditional run play, you still sort of get an extension of it to where it's kind of like a makeshift run play. But nonetheless, Louisville went out into the state of Georgia and got a very, very talented running back in the 2024 class. Duke Watson is rated as a 4-star prospect, rated as the 429th best prospect according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, 37th best running back in the country, 50th best prospect in the state of Georgia. Now, one thing that I will tell you is that when you look at the rankings all across the board, I think that the only site that has Watson as a 4-star is On3, which is pretty ironic with how Louisville fans view On3. But outside of that, he's a 3-star on Rivals, I believe, 3-star on ESPN, 3-star on 24/7 Sports, but he's rated in the 24/7 Sports Composite, which is supposed to be a combination of all of the ranking services into one. Nonetheless, I'm not here to argue over a little bit of a difference in rankings and, a technicality issue, because when you watch the film, well, simply put, Duke Watson is lightning in a bottle. Every time he touches the ball, it seems like it's going to be a house call. Looking at his statistics over the past couple of years, played for Mary Persons High School in Forsyth, Georgia. As a sophomore, he had 230 rushing attempts for just over 1,700 yards with 25 rushing touchdowns, which is absolutely incredible. And then you look at what he did in his junior season. Not necessarily the same usage, had 30 less carries, but still turned in a very, very interesting, or should I say impressive stat line, 1,669 rushing yards, 14 rushing touchdowns. So over the past 2 seasons in high school ball, 39 rushing touchdowns, over 3,300 yards. Also is a track star. In 10th grade, had a time of 11.12 in the 100-meter dash. This past season, 8.3 yards per carry. Also caught 17 passes, scored 2 touchdowns while recording 184 receiving yards. So the dynamic ability is there. And obviously the track background suggests that the speed and stamina is there as well, which bodes well for his ability to create home run type plays in the open field. However, what I will suggest when watching his film is that you would expect a guy who runs track, a player with the statistics that he has, is that speed's going to be his main call to why he's ranked as high as he is. I would argue that it's overall a balanced skill set is why Duke Watson is as highly rated as he is. Not only is he extremely fast, what you have to also look at is the agility, the ability to switch directions on a dime, the ability to accelerate and decelerate depending on, the coverage, depending on obviously what's unfolding on the field, so on and so forth, right? But not only that, but the ability to catch passes out of the backfield. And that's why I mentioned the whole extension of the running game. Sometimes when you watched Purdue last season, the past couple seasons, one thing that they like to do is get their running backs the ball out in space with blockers ahead of them. One way they do that is creating screen situations, slants out into the flat, whatever may have you, whatever type of situation you would see fit for respective running back. But Jeff Brohm has been known to dial up those types of plays. Now, granted, I think that you're going to see more of a willingness to stay with the running game, because I think it gets misconstrued as like he's running a strictly air raid offense, which just is not the case. Louisville is still going to run the football, and it's suggested by the players that Jeff Brohm has brought in, both in the Flyville 23 class and via the transfer portal. So not only do you have that aspect of having a home run ability on the field as a running back, but also as a receiver out of the backfield. Duke Watson isn't necessarily a small guy, 6 foot, 180 pounds, solid upper body strength, but also solid lower body strength, being able to turn on the jets, getting out in space. And when he gets out in space, there's a very good chance you're not going to catch him. And that's just how things go. It is what it is. But very, very dynamic player. High school recruiting wise, Kentucky was another program that was highly involved in this recruitment. He actually decommitted from Georgia Tech back actually a month ago today. He decommitted from the Yellow Jackets program, which is very interesting because he committed there just 2 months prior, back on March 11th. Visited Mississippi, visited NC State within that frame unofficially, had an official visit to Penn State this past weekend, or I'm sorry, 2 weekends ago. And then actually had scheduled an official visit to Penn State. I'm not sure if he ever made that visit, just kind of based upon what the 24/7 Sports timeline reads. But Cincinnati, Boston College, Kansas State, Kentucky, Minnesota, Mississippi State, NC State, Mississippi, Penn State, Purdue, so on and so forth, UCF, you name it. There's a lot of pretty solid programs, pretty reputable programs after Duke Watson. So this isn't one of those situations to where you look at a 4-star player and say, hey, look, Louisville got a 4-star commit. But when you look at the offer sheet, it's like, is he really a 4-star? Is this more an indication of the lack of talent that he's going up against on a weekly basis in the high school ranks? I don't think it's either of those. I think that the rankings are right where they probably should be. The film is jumping off the page good. And I like what Louisville has done with the position, adding a guy like Duke Watson to join Isaac Brown in the 2024 class. Louisville has the opportunity to reload at that position moving forward. So I think that, at the end of the day, this is a situation to where it's a solid addition. We talked about Louisville adding 2 running backs to this class due to the possible turnover after this season, but nonetheless, you wanted to also add a very talented guy to go alongside Isaac Brown. One thing that I wasn't necessarily fond of the possibility is you had a very, very highly rated guy like Isaac Brown, and then you go out and you get a lower rated guy because you got a higher rated guy. I'm glad that Louisville went out and got 2 highly regarded running backs in the country, one from Georgia, one from South Florida. I'm very intrigued to see what this means for some of the other guys that they're recruiting. Are they going to continue to recruit some of those guys? What happens to players like Jason Brown and Derek McFall? Well, we will discuss here in just a moment after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. What you need to do right now is you need to make a fast break to FanDuel while the NBA is still going on. Well, the chances are that the Denver Nuggets might have closed out the NBA Finals by the time you're still reading this or listening to this. But nonetheless, right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if that first bet doesn't win. A lot of great things should be drawing you to FanDuel. Exceptional promotions daily. They have a safe and secure app that you can use to, withdraw and deposit your funds, and you get paid instantly. There's no wait in that. There's no better place to bet on all of the playoff action in all sports than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, heading on into the second segment of the show. As I mentioned, as you can see on the right-hand side, I think that's extremely cool. Shout out to the Locked On graphics team for being able to turn this out for the college channel. Absolutely exceptional. Definitely keeps you in the know. We're going to talk about what's next for the running back room after this commitment. Before we do that, I do want to apologize for my lack of communication. I went on sort of a hiatus at the end of May. Obviously, this is the off season, considered the off season for the podcast, in which there will only be about 13 episodes for June, 13 for July, before we get back into the next official season in August. So I do want to apologize for not communicating that I was going to take a hiatus. Honestly, I wasn't necessarily sure if I was going to or not, and then I just full on just took a break. So I do apologize, but we're back. We got some exciting content ideas for the rest of this month, and obviously it makes for some good content when we get commitments, which Louisville just did, and they've got some other commitments that we're going to talk about in the upcoming episodes. But what's next for the running back room? Obviously, we talked about Louisville going after 2 running backs. Why is that? Why did Louisville need to go after 2 running backs, in your opinion, Dalton? Well, truthfully speaking, I think that, as I've mentioned time and time again, there's so much uncertainty in college football as it is. I mean, we are simply trying to navigate uncharted waters in college sports with NIL, with the one-time transfer rule. So you're sort of trying to construct rosters on the fly. It's essentially one-year contracts with players being able to transfer out after their freshman season. So, it changes the way you recruit players, because if you recruit guys that you feel like you can develop, well, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay long enough to be developed. And other guys to where, hey, we see this guy as a multiple year starter. Well, if he has one good year, there's always the chance of a bigger school coming out and poaching one of your players. It's happened multiple times. It's happened for Louisville. It's happened against Louisville. It's not going to be the last time that it happens until, something changes. That's sort of the current landscape of, collegiate sports, and that's something that we have to focus on moving forward. So nonetheless, for starters, I think that you have to do your best to try to construct your next year's roster the best way that you can, living in the current state. But also looking at this respective running back room for Louisville, you have Jawar Jordan, Maurice Turner, Isaac Guerendo, Kewan Brown. You have some walk-on guys as well. It makes you wonder. Projected for next year's team, Jordan has eligibility to come back. Guerendo is a grad transfer, so he'll be gone. So essentially that's Isaac Brown taking Isaac Guerendo's spot. Maurice Turner and Kewan Brown obviously both have eligibility remaining as well. But nonetheless, here's how I'm looking at this. Obviously, you're replacing Isaac Guerendo with Isaac Brown after this upcoming season. So you have 4 guys, and that's probably enough to make work, but still you can add another player. This is where things get interesting because I've been an advocate of Jawar Jordan's game pretty much since the end of this past season, when he essentially turned in a small role at the beginning of the season, turned it into a significant role due to some injuries before him on the depth chart, and flat out showed out is what you want to say. So it is what it is. I think that ultimately, like I said, plan for every season. It's hard to do that on the fly, but you try to be as proactive as you can. And, I've mentioned that Jawar Jordan is a guy that after this upcoming season, I truly believe that he can go to the NFL draft and get drafted within the first 2 days. Probably day 2 is more realistic. That's just how high I view his game. I think that he is a guy that's going to flourish in a feature role. I think that at the end of the day, he's going to get the opportunity to shine. He's going to be, obviously, in my opinion, number 1 on the depth chart rolling into that Georgia Tech game on Labor Day weekend. And I think that there's an abundance of opportunity being that number 1 guy to showcase, hey, look, I am as good as they come as it relates to, running backs in the ACC. And I think that he's going to be a guy that rushes for over 1,000 yards. And I could be wrong, but this is truly where I'm kind of going out on a limb and just making a prediction. And if he leaves, well, you're down to 3 scholarship running backs and you need to bring in another one. I think that this is insurance that, it's probably not, you're probably not going to bring the whole running back room back. Now, let's say that Jawar would come back in 2024, which I don't think he will, but let's play the hypothetical game. Let's say he does. Does a guy like Maurice Turner, who going into his 3rd season already showing in his first year that he can be a solid, option in the running back room, if he has a solid second year or doesn't necessarily get the carries he feels like he deserves, could you also see him say, hey, look, Jawar's coming back, no disrespect to Louisville, but I think I want to go elsewhere to be a possible number 1 running back option? That could be the case. And then you're left with another scholarship that you have to fill. Let's say both of those guys come back. You have a guy like Kewan Brown, who, true freshman this upcoming season from Atlanta, 3-star rated guy. He sees the depth chart and says, look, there's Jawar Jordan, there's Maurice Turner. Now it's Isaac Brown, and another running back. Do I need to go elsewhere to get more playing time? Possibly. We're starting to see, I'm not saying that this applies to these respective players, but we're starting to see a trend to where if you're not playing early on, players leave in favor of early playing time. So that's interesting to look at. On the other side, Louisville was recruiting some highly rated guys. Does this mean that the Cardinals stop recruiting those guys? I think that it's rumored that this is probably going to be a smaller class in Flyville 24 with the transfer numbers that Louisville's brought in and so on and so forth. But they've got 2 running backs, but, still recruiting guys like Jason Brown, like Derek McFall. I think that it was one of those situations where I could definitely see a situation where it was like, okay, look, whoever commits first is going to fill the running back room. And I could definitely see that because of the urgency, how quickly Duke Watson turned around and said, look, I'm committing. And now you have your second running back in the class. I think it depends on situation. If Jason Brown wants into the class, you start to wonder because, he's a top 60 rated player. Derek McFall, he's listed as a running back, but with his ability to play almost every other position, in the skill positions. He played quarterback this past year down in Texas. You have, a situation where he might slide out as a wide receiver, a hybrid running back. Who knows? I think you're maybe looking at a situation where you recruit him as an athlete and figure out the position, figure out the fit later. I think McFall could be one of those situations to where you take a player as talented as he is and figure the situation out later. Jason Brown's an interesting situation because he's so highly rated that it does make you wonder if Louisville will still try to go after him. But you also have to understand that maybe Louisville's not necessarily truly in the final group for either of those players, so it might necessarily be a moot point. I think that that's best case scenario if all 4 players want to join the fold, but there's a likelihood that that's just not the case. However, outside of that, I think that that's probably going to wrap up the running back room in terms of, recruiting. Now, granted, they'll probably stay in contact with certain players because you just never know. Just trying to not get caught surprised on signing day to where, if one were to decommit, that, you at least still have that relationship. But ultimately, look, I think that this is a situation to where you filled out your running back room for the future. You're betting on at least one of Isaac Guerendo, or actually two of, let me rephrase. You're betting on Isaac Guerendo leaving, obviously, and then one of Jawar Jordan, Keywan Brown, and Maurice Turner leaving. And even if they don't, it's not far-fetched to suggest that Louisville could carry 5 running backs on the roster. So just something to look forward to. I think that the running back room is in good hands and in a good situation. So, a lot of stuff we can talk about football-wise, but we're going to end the episode with a Monday mailbag. Before we do that, I want to tell you about what's coming up on the docket. I want to thank you all again for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On the Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Coming up on tomorrow's episode of the show, some more commitments. Jaden Spearman has committed to the Cardinals program. We'll talk about what he brings to his position group, so on and so forth, what it means for that position group, and more, so be sure to stay tuned. But nonetheless, heading into the final segment of the show, it is a weekly mailbag segment, a Monday mailbag edition. Obviously, we haven't recorded for almost 2 weeks, so why not have a mailbag? Because you all have had some questions. You've done a great job of sending those in. If you have any questions, you can tag me on Twitter, DM me on Twitter at @dpence_. The podcast Twitter page is at @LO_Louisville. Sorry, I had to remember that. Couple questions. Let's start out football because we're already discussing football. Louisville seems to be the trendy selection as one of the dark horses across the country. Why do you think this is? I know that you've talked about it. Can you break it down just a little bit further? Yeah, I mean, I've said it a couple times. I think that it makes sense. You have a new head coach that has succeeded at his past level. It's a harmonious reunion with Jeff Brohm being, essentially like the first football family of Louisville, coming home. This is an extremely exciting opportunity. You retain a lot of the returners from last year. You've lost some guys in the NFL, but you did a great job of bringing in a solid 5L23 high school recruiting class and a solid transfer portal class, one of the best transfer portal classes in the country, and multiple guys who can start right away. You have a schedule that allows you to achieve a ton of success while not playing a ton of the top ACC teams, more specifically Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina. So dark horse-wise, I mean, I get it. I think Louisville's the trendy pick for a reason, and I think that those are the reasons. So moving right on along, identify one player that you haven't talked about much at all on the defensive side of the ball that you feel like could play a big role for the Cardinals this upcoming season. I think a guy like, I'm going to go with an incoming transfer. I'm going to go Marcus Washington Jr., the transfer from Georgia. Didn't play a lot last season, obviously playing for the national champion Georgia Bulldogs. Very talented 4-star player coming out of the 2022 class. So has a year in the college weight program playing against future NFL draft picks. So I think that, he could see a situation where he's at least in a situational role, potentially in a rotational setting, because I do think that Storm Duck, Jarvis Brownlee Jr., Quincy Riley are your 3 cornerback starters, but I think that those guys could be in line to play a rotation with Marcus Washington Jr. Moving on, basketball-wise, there has been rumors that there might be issues with Tyler Johnson's eligibility. Is this something to be concerned about at this moment? I mean, it's not ideal. It seems like at this time, there's still some confidence on Louisville's side. I've been asked about a time frame of knowing. I think that if we're going to find something out at all, it would probably be late in the summer if there were eligibility issues, but I haven't been able to confirm that. So I'm not necessarily going to, entertain that argument because I'm just not necessarily so sure of it. So, I've seen it. I've seen the rumors, which if that were to be the case, that would not be ideal considering that Louisville desperately needed guard play when they got a guy like Tyler Johnson. But I'm not necessarily ready to hit the panic button just yet. We'll continue to see, what unfolds, if anything does at all. If it's a rumor, if it's the truth, we'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. So Final question, looking about, do you think that Dan McDonnell is going to leave this season, or after this season? I think it's almost already been confirmed that he's not going anywhere, which is good. I know that he has some concerns over facilities, and, he's talked about what he's need to do in terms of roster construction for next year. So I don't necessarily think he's gone at all. And actually, we have one more question. So, this is a recent one. What do you think about Haley Van Lith's response when she was asked why she went to LSU, mentioning that she had to do what's best for herself and her happiness? I mean, I'm past this point. I mean, whatever you believe as the reason why she left Louisville, it is what it is. I mean, we're a couple months past that point. Give it up. I know it stings. I know it's not ideal. A star player leaving Louisville and going elsewhere, especially the national champions. It is what it is. What I will say is that I wouldn't necessarily get too caught up in it if I were you. Just appreciate the team we have now. Wish Haley the best of luck. I know that you'll say, well, she's gone elsewhere. Why would I wish her the best of luck? These are college kids. I mean, let them do what they feel is best for themselves, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, it's their life, it's their career, it's their decision. If they feel like it's the best decision for themselves, so be it. It shouldn't affect how much sleep you get per night or anything like that, but it is what it is. Best of luck to her. I hope that she finds what she's looking for at LSU. I hope that she's able to be happy and, find that the decision was the right one. And I hope that, this is a fruitful year for her. But like I said, we have an exciting team over here at Louisville that we're going to talk about more as the season progresses, and obviously throughout the season, as this is a show that not only talks about men's basketball and football, but also all of the other sports: lacrosse, soccer, baseball, softball, field hockey, tennis, swimming, women's basketball. It's Locked On Louisville, and we're going to talk about all of the Louisville sports. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you